you end up losing the people that are most valuable and preserving the people who are struggling. And the other thing that was a surprise to me over the years is that every time I made a hard call, I can look back and those people by and large are significantly better off somewhere else. That I would put so much pressure on myself to not just be empathetic, but to be the answer for all of the things that, and to be everything to everybody. And it just doesn't work that way. So empathy at scale, is really the only way that it works to scale an organization effectively.
Hey guys, Damian Stevens, host of MSP Mindset. Today I continue my mission to interview 100 of the fastest growing and most interesting MSPs on the planet. Today I'm joined by Peter Melby, the CEO of New Charter Technologies, which happens to be one of the largest MSPs on the planet. And if you want to learn how you went from 2 employees to building a $20 million MSP to becoming the CEO of New Charter with somewhere north of 1,200 employees, then don't miss out on this conversation. However, we talk about empathy at scale and how you can use that as the secret to drive deeper relationships with your team and with your clients and leverage technology as a lever to drive business change. And now there's no more race to the bottom, commoditized MSP or tech stack. So if you want to differentiate your MSP and set yourself up for growth like none other, then don't miss out on our conversation. Because you've had this crazy rise, but
yeah,
you might frame it differently, but I think you had to be a different person a few times probably.
I've had an interesting journey, in the MSP space in 24 years. And it's been my entire adult life. And it's changed a lot from being a single employee myself to having 1,200 employees. And obviously there's no way to shortcut that. And along the lines, or along the way, my passion has changed as well. I grew up in a place where, my passion was the technology. Computers were new. It didn't matter that I was young because I had the same amount of time, with a computer that a lot of other people did. Yeah. And so it was just that thing that we were able to bring. I created success for people just because I knew how to operate a computer, how to fix a computer, things like that. And it created a sense of impatience for me around school, around what a longer term, or investment in a career might look like, because I had this thing that was right in front of me. Yeah. And so the short synopsis of my journey, is that I started an MSP. And at the time, it wasn't called an MSP; it was just an IT company, and grew that with my partner, through a lot of different stages. And it's $20+ million MSP. Joined and really helped spearhead this platform that I now run called New Charter Technologies, and that's a different animal, as well. We've done, we've acquired 28 best-in-class MSPs and created, value, created synergies, created, more value for the customers, through our strategy there. So, like you would imagine, the journey required very different pivots, very different times. Some of them intentional. Some of them known, some of them not as known. So happy to dig into the whole journey. If there are specific pieces that we want to start with, you tell me.
This episode is brought to you by Serbosity. I started Serbosity because I was an MSP that lost data because I thought backup success meant I could recover. And boy, was I wrong. If you've ever been there or anywhere close, you know how much your stomach turns over the thought of not being able to recover any version of the data for your client. Now, naively, I set off to build a better mousetrap and build a better backup product until finally I realized it's all about the people and the process. So you have a choice to make. Do nothing and bury your head in the sand, or level up your processes. Now you can do that by either hiring Savosity, where we'll take all the workload of managing backups off of your plate and test your backups daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly. Or you can keep the tech stack you have in place, your existing backup and DR provider, and steal my 18 years of knowledge and download that process and add that to your operational maturity today. Yeah, I want to revisit the timeline, but I'd like to stay on that thought, which is like, you said something interesting, which is different. Even your passion changed. And not everybody is either aware or shares that. So what do you mean by that?
It's funny. I say it changed. I don't know if it actually really changed that much or if it just, got deeper and deeper, and I understood it more over time, because there is a common thread, with what I've been passionate about since the very beginning. And it's doing something that no one else can do or has done. Focusing on people and people organizations at scale. And the idea of creating value in ways that are innovative. And so that was true at the beginning too. I just didn't know that. It looked a lot like I like playing with computers, and helping people when they thanked me for doing something that other people couldn't solve for them. That made me feel good.
And if I understand, you started Greystone like 20?
20.
And dropped out of college, is that right?
Yeah. So the funny story there, it's funny now. I don't think it was funny to my parents at the time, but people love to say that, they look at people like Bill Gates and, Zuckerberg and all of that and say, oh, college dropouts, visionaries, brilliant. That wasn't me. I was impatient. I was bored, and I was a little lazy. And so I looked at it and said, I can fix a computer. I could code, I could do HTML, code and some programming for websites. I could do a lot of technical things that were very much in demand and interesting. At the time, the school was not interesting, and I didn't get anything out of it from a immediate satisfaction point of view. So it was all the right, obvious recipe to drop out, and do this. The difference is, for me, my parents are teachers and my dad's a college professor. So that was never even not part of my plan. That it was something that I was going to be, I didn't know if I would go into science or if I'd go into technology, but not finishing college was an assumption, not just for them, but for me. And so it was an interesting conversation when after 1 year where I really focused more on what I was doing business wise and technology wise, I said, I'm going to take some time off. I remember my dad said, I know what that means. He's like, it's going to be really hard to go back. But he said, I also know that I have students who are here, and I can tell it's only because their parents expect them to be here. And they don't learn the things that other students learn. They go through the motions, they check the boxes. So they didn't like the decision. They didn't agree with the decision, but they supported it. And
that's big already.
It is, absolutely. And I mean, I owe a lot to that. The thing that I say as it relates to that decision and how all of that stuff has worked out is that sometimes we make good decisions and sometimes we learn how to make our decisions good. And this was very much the latter for me. This was me being in a situation where I woke up one day and said, oh no, I got to prove that this works. So my work ethic, my drive, and I found a new level of passion, for acceleration, for scale, for learning new, how to do new things around this came from a lot of fear about the decision that I had made and the fact that I knew that it wasn't for the right reasons. I didn't have a plan. I just had some skills. And so I credit that, the year and a half after that with a lot of, just the foundation that I needed, where I looked at it and said, I got to pay rent. I got to do these things. I don't have any help. I'm not living in a dorm. I'm not, I don't have support. I've got to make it happen, and ultimately that piece I found I really like making it happen. I really like, pushing hard. I didn't work as hard as I should have at school, but it didn't mean that I wasn't capable of really really pushing to do things, that I knew I was capable of doing, and even things beyond what I knew I was capable of doing. And so that's, I say oftentimes, I don't think I would be here if I hadn't quit school. Mm-hmm. I don't think I would be the person or have the drive that I do. But I can't look back at that decision that I made when I was 19 years old and say that it was made for the right reasons.
And that's one of those two things can be true at the same time type of statements, right?
Exactly. So, when I started the MSP really in earnest, that next year, before that I just dabbled in, really freelancing from a, web development and IT support, perspective, and I could pay my rent with the work that I was doing kind of ad hoc, but I called it a business, but it really wasn't. So Greystone, started my business partner Jesse Armstrong, and I had known each other since I was in high school and he was in college. We worked together, and he had the vision for what Greystone could be, but he had a commitment to an enterprise technology job that was a great opportunity for him. And so he stayed, he was an advisor, in that, and I was doing the work day to day. I was having the conversations, I was fixing the computers. I was, just basically building a client base, around that. And he focused on moonlighting and doing some back office stuff and billing and the things that I wasn't thinking about. That was another level of structure that really helped me, was that, again, I had talent, but he had some of the understanding of how all of that stuff, came together. He did finish college. So the idea was, for a while, we'll just, hey, let's do this and see what happens with it. But it was something that I never thought was my permanent career. Mm-hmm. I remember thinking every year, like, hey, this is a good thing for me to do. I kind of figure out what the world is like, and then if I'm going to go back to school, if I'm going to get a real job, things like that. And year over year, we looked at it and said, well, it's getting a little better. It's going forward, and I think 15 years later, I woke up and said, oh, I think this might be my real job.
Yeah. So I think people, it's crazy to ask people to say, what are you going to be when you grow up? Sometimes I think, you haven't figured it out at this age, let alone when you're 18 or 20.
Yeah. I even apply that to people who look at and say, what's the 5-year plan for your business? Mm-hmm. In this, there's a couple of things about that. Well, number one, in this industry, the outside forces are going to be very different in 5 years than they are now. We can do some level of prediction, but we don't know entirely. Right. And two, if I would have set out a 5-year plan in any 5-year period over the last 20 years, I would have sold myself and the business short on what we ended up being able to do. And I don't credit myself for that. There was a lot of people around me, a lot of circumstances. I mean, there's so much that has gone into this, but at no point along the way did we look at this and say, hey, let's build a, $300 going on $500 million organization, in this space. I remember the first time I had an employee, and the first time that I had, 3 employees, and the first time that I didn't have to be on call on the weekend. I mean, those were the big milestones.
I remember those too. I was like, this is it. This is easy street. I remember I was so naive early on. I was like, if we get to where I could have 2 employees, life would be so much easier.
Yes. Yeah. I remember, my wife, my girlfriend at the time, saying, are you going to have to work every holiday? And we had some clients that were, event centers, and, it's like, I don't really have any other options. This is what I do, and I don't have anything else to fall back on. And it was annoying, but it was just the reality of it. And I developed some really bad habits out of necessity over those first, years that I even tried, that I still try and break now, where, text messaging wasn't a thing. We got some of the first BlackBerries, so we had email on our devices, which is great. But even before that, it was just always having to pay attention to my phone and always having to be so reactive to, if the phone rang, I had to jump on something, and if I got an email, I had to jump on something. I had to know right away because there was no backstop, with that. And even, 20 plus years later, I look at it and I think, I still just get that same kind of urgent reaction when something happens. I have to get on that now, and I've had to unwind some of that stuff. But it also created that understanding of what customers need, and what this industry looks like, and should look like over time. And so if we follow that kind of passion path again, how that evolved in those early years is that I looked at it and I said, all right, it's really, really hard. People are really struggling, as I talk to them and understand them, the bigger they get, they struggle with the team building, with culture, with the people aspect of things. So I really need to focus on that part. And it's natural to me as a person. So that's helpful. And then I need to focus on what it takes to just keep bringing on new clients and grow to the point that I can have a bigger team so that things can be spread out a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And so the passion has shifted away from just the technology and more to the organizational structure, in that, still with that root passion of let's build something that no one else is building. Mm. And we started out those years by saying, we have to be a relationship-oriented business. That's what made me successful in my first IT jobs. Is what made it's where I saw success in communicating with customers. I wanted people to enjoy their experience. What I didn't know at the time was that I was actually better, not just because they enjoyed the experience of working with me, but because they started talking to me, and building, and I built a relationship with them, and there was trust, and so they would tell me more things. And ultimately, I didn't know how to fix every problem, but I did know how to get to the root cause of some things. So look at it and say, and oftentimes the root cause of their stress was things like, I can't print, right now. Okay, well, that's a blanket statement, but understanding what they're trying to print when, if they're on a deadline, then even buying myself the time by rerouting printing to over here so that they, their stress level calmed down while I figured out how to solve the issue that I didn't understand. Those were phenomenal learning points for me because it was all about the experience. It was all about what they were trying, what they had to get into that. And so I said, we have to scale that. We have to scale the ability to have those types of experiences. So we have to be relationship oriented. And we built our business around having deep individual relationships with customers, even as we, the employee count grew. And I remember being at an industry meeting one time and someone said, you can't do that once you get once you get past 5 people.
5 people. Wow. That's a pretty low number to give up on relationships.
Yeah, exactly. And then the next time it was like, that's not going to scale to 20 people. Mm-hmm. The next time it was scale past 20 people. It's like, well, that's not going to get you to 50. Mm-hmm. And at some point you're going to have to break that and just, we didn't have your, nameless, faceless help desk, or things like that. It was much more of a boutique, deeper service connection. And over time, we very much learned that we had to evolve our view of relationships and what that looked like, but we could never afford to let it go because it wasn't about just them liking it. It was about them getting what they needed from us and being able to communicate what they needed. And that has been the fabric of scaling a lot over the years, is realizing that it's still a people industry. Yeah. And if we lose sight of that and forget that, then we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like it's too easy to get caught in the day-to-day. And if you go on a lot of technology forums, especially the public ones like Reddit, man, we can get caught in this conversation of like which part of the stack do I change out to make a 1% difference in my margin instead of spending more time with the client or making a bigger impact with the client or equipping my team in a better way. So why do you think that is?
It's a perfect question if we look at the kind of this timeline, in the journey and using that as a backdrop for some of the stuff. So, in that point, probably 10 years in, where we've got a team of 8 to 10 people, we start to see, to work with more sophisticated clients, more sophisticated companies. And we succeeded by having deep relationships, understanding them, and getting a little bit deeper than IT was used to getting in understanding the business. What's your job? What are you trying to accomplish? And going not just setting up the technology, but how to use it, and then how to use it for your specific, needs in that. And I've said this thing for almost 15 years now, that IT has the most visibility of any other party in an organization. You have the leadership, and you have to have relationships there. The team. You understand the systems. You have access to data. You know the inner workings better than, across the board, probably better than anybody else, because everybody else is pretty specialized and siloed, or really, really general and non-technical. And so if we have more visibility into operations than anybody else, we've spent the last 20 years using that to just do a better job of fixing printers, and changing passwords. We haven't cracked the code, and even though we've talked about it, for a long, long time. I haven't cracked the code on the idea that we need to be able to change business. We need not just change the technology. We have to solve business problems with technology. Mm-hmm. We're pretty good at solving technology problems. We always have been. Mm-hmm. So that's if you look at the type of people that tend to go into IT, and that have tended to go into IT, and also where we're comfortable, it's significantly more in things like the stack, and what tools, what's, all of those pieces. And so, I think that's a lot of where that mindset comes from, and it's a really hard thing to get out of. We built a culture around it, and then we built an industry around it with all these vendors. Right. So, but I think that's the challenge that you see in there, is the fact that we go to what's native to us, and so if we need to change the business, or we need to get excited about something, or find something new, innovating in the technology just seems to be more native, and it leaves open a significant market opportunity, but it's a market opportunity that gets increasingly harder to capture, as the business landscape gets more and more complex. Mm-hmm.
So I want to go back to your journey a little bit. Mm-hmm. So you started at 20 with, I remember I started my first business, I think also at 20, which is, if I recall, that was the peak of my wisdom. That's when I thought I knew, right? And you built Greystone Technologies to larger than almost any MSP by itself. Mm-hmm. So over what period of time, and about how large did that get by itself?
Yeah, so we were, and it's funny as I look back, because the transition to new charter, wasn't, there was an absolute date, but it wasn't, necessary. I mean, it evolved, through the process. We built for 19 years on our own, about close to 20 million in revenue, and it's interesting because $20 million for an MSP, for a business, is still considered a small business by government definitions, or but in the MSP space, it's massive.
It's top, it's past 1%. But what I love is what you're saying is it's interesting, because in other, aside from the government, you're like lower mid-market, right? You're not even mid-market yet in every other industry.
Yeah. And so you think about why that is, and you realize that the fragmentation and the limitation, I think it's what we learned at the beginning, is that people want to work with people they know. People want to, there's a trust element. We're part of someone's organizational structure in their business as an MSP, as an outsourced provider. Mm-hmm. We're not a product, and so it's a people business, and people businesses are really, really hard to scale. Mm-hmm. And I learned early on, I mentioned I had interest in people. I had a knack for communicating with people, and I cared about them and all of that. And I said, that's going to really help me in this, and it did for a while. But I got to the point where we were $1 million in revenue, and actually learned through a series of circumstances I didn't know much when it came to culture at scale. Mm-hmm. And what I even say, empathy at scale, because it's easy to understand a person. It's easy to understand, their mindset, ask them questions, one-on-one. It's a little bit harder to understand everybody when you got, 5 in the room.
Yeah.
A lot harder when it's 10. If you have 20, you just can't. Mm-hmm. And so you end up with this artificial ceiling because you can no longer control and see enough to control the outcomes for those customers through the relationships that you have with your employees. And that's where most growth breaks down. It's different employee numbers for everybody, but eventually you're just like, all right, the service degrades, the people are unhappy. They're looking at this and they're not understanding the fact that I care about them. They're not understanding the fact that we're building a business for their benefit. They're seeing all the downsides and thinking that we've got it out, and that we're we've got it out for them, or that we're trying to manipulate them or make and things like that. And I looked at it and said, well, we're not trying to do any of that, but it's a very natural course for people on this, on any business journey. And in the MSP space, it just happens to happen for most when we reach some of those sizes of employee count and revenue and all of that. And if you think about that in context, one of my favorite books is by Jim Collins. And most people think of Good to Great. I think Jim Collins. One of my favorite books is called How the Mighty Fall by Jim Collins. And I have to be honest about the fact that I don't actually remember much of what it says. It's one of my favorite books because of why it exists. He had to write that book because all of his case studies from Good to Great, massive bestseller, they all faltered and they all failed. Yeah,
you read it now and you're like, it's not relevant. The case studies are not relevant at all.
Yeah, it was a point in time, that was just so that if you think about that, and one of the things that we learned and really started to establish in our organization is a recognition that on a long enough timeline, every culture succumbs to what we call the laws of human nature. That if you try to prop up something that's not uniquely connected, in terms of how humans actually operate, then it's going to have a short lifespan. And so if your culture is based on, let's all be best friends, let's all be family, let's have happy hours after work, let's give, great benefits, unlimited vacation. I would say if the best thing about your company is that you can spend unlimited time away from your company, then you got a problem. But none of those things really are a sustainable culture. Culture, for me, comes from recognizing that we all want something out of life. We all want things. And some of those things are very different, person to person. But some of those things are the same. And if we understand what we want that is the same, and we align our culture in those things, and it's big themes. It's things like everybody wants to succeed. Everybody wants to improve. Everybody wants to have, authentic connections and be able to be themselves. Everyone wants to make more money, and people generally like doing new things and taking risks as long as they have some level of protection, and safety net around that. And no one wants to fail. Those are all things that are true of a company too. And so by being intentional about culture and saying, hey, it's not all these perks. It's not this short-term definition. It's
not
actually
ping-pong tables and beanbags. And
and don't get me wrong, we have that stuff. Like at a foosball table, we enjoy each other. We have, happy hours, there's camaraderie there, but that sits on top of our culture. That exists because we set out on, with this desire to make sure that our culture was rooted in authenticity, and that authenticity was a recognition that, we do have a lot of things that align us. And so when we can look at it and say, hey, we want to grow, we want to add more customers, and that's going to add stress to a service team. But once we add X number, of customers or X amount of revenue, we can employ, more people in another layer, and then we can have you go from on-call services being, once every 3 weeks to once every 8 weeks. That's, material change for everybody, and growth, along the way incentivizes, it creates opportunity for everybody. Mm-hmm. And when we started doing that more intentionally, we started understanding what it took to get the types of people that we wanted, in those roles. Once they understood, we're a growth company. So don't come in here if you really just want to do the same job every day for 20 years. Mm-hmm. Because we're not going to be able to incentivize you to really, have what you want in that space. But we don't have to. I mean, the people that we have come in, are the people that were ambitious about changing things. So it created a very different view of what we felt like sustainable culture was. And that was probably the most important and also the most painful lesson, because it sucks realizing that your people don't think about you the way that you think about you, or they don't think about the company the way that you're really investing in the company. They don't see how much you're trying, for them, in that. Mm-hmm. Those are lonely days. Yeah. So, but that was transformative, and that for us was, that kind of, the journey started in that 10 employee time frame, and it wasn't just automatic realization and we're fine now. I mean, it continued, for a number of years and a number of other trajectories, because we realized that the next step, after realizing that, is then figuring out how to build process to do it at scale, and at every scale along the way. And so that's a totally different thing.
So what do you attribute all the growth? Let's just stick with Greystone for a moment. We'll come back to, but all the growth at Greystone, or not all, but obviously you made it to a point that almost nobody does. So what do you attribute that to?
Relentlessness around customers and employee value. Yeah, honestly, the fact that we never gave up. We, even in those really, really hard times, when we had disconnects, cultural issues, that stemmed from our inability to effectively manage, different mindsets and people who had different ideas and manage them in a healthy, effective way together. And then, tolerating behavior that we thought was, or that was difficult, that, because we thought the people or the processes were too critical to what we did, not being willing to change those. But we never gave up. And we never lost, and we going back to that original advice, we never looked at it and said, you know what, they're right. We have to stop being a people, focused company. We have to stop being a relationship focused company. What we learned is that we have to be relentless about institutionalizing some things, and elevating some things and making hard decisions, and all that. And so the relentlessness was always a bit of a chip on the shoulder, probably going back to, quit school to do it, or people told us that this wasn't going to work this way. Mm-hmm. But also because it felt like it was right. It felt like it was the right way to do it, that we were doing more for businesses because of how we were able to operate,
I think there's a lot of people that need to hear that, because there are peer groups and there are service leadership and there's all these things that are wonderful. They're not bad. But I think sometimes I can get caught up and say my EBITDA is not high enough, or my growth isn't high enough along with EBITDA, or some other margin, and squeeze the business in kind of an artificial way.
Yeah. And when you squeeze the business in an artificial way, it's a great way of saying it. It's different than trying something and making a mistake and, and correcting the mistake. It's intentionally setting something on a short-term path. Mm. And that actually probably pivots pretty well, into the new charter phase, of things, and where that came for us. So we got to the point where we were at the top of the pack, in terms of MSPs. We looked around, we We're excited about it. We still had plenty of issues. I mean, businesses are all about just solving, continually solving the challenges that are in front of you. And we said, the M&A calls were coming fast and furious. And we long said, we talked to a lot of them, but we long said, hey, we don't like this, what this is doing to our industry. We had competitors acquired, and we loved that because customers and employees would, scatter. It's like, we can collect those up. We can
Great
provide
for
a
you.
better experience.
Yeah.
So great for us.
Yeah.
But we also encountered the challenges of having the capital that we, wanted to be able to do the types of things that we wanted to grow past that, and being a bootstrap, $20 million organization is it's a hard endeavor, to maintain. People look at it and say, oh, you've arrived. It's like, well, if this thing significantly falters, if there's some issue, I'm not liquid enough to be able to, just write the check to address all of this, and it's still my livelihood on the line. It's just on, it's a bigger line, but it's more precarious. It's
harder to have a PG at that scale.
Yeah.
Cover payroll.
Yep, exactly. And we, you talk to any entrepreneur about the stress of cash flow, and cash flow stress doesn't go away if you get bigger, the swings can get bigger, and then the volume is something like, I don't know what to do about that. So we started having those conversations to say, how responsible is it that we continue this path, and what are our options? And we hated everything that was out there.
Let me interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
I just love the frame of that, right? How responsible is it that we continue this path? Like, that's a different question, because a lot of people say, I'm not ready to sell until I'm a certain age, or why should I sell, or sometimes frame an exit or a partnership or joining a platform or just anything other than me maintaining control as a negative. So I love that you framed it as what's the responsible thing to do. And
it probably, it relates in some ways to personal feelings and personal experience in that, because it does come from the stress that comes with, the balance of that. But absolutely, there's just a different dynamic when you look at it that way. And we looked at the other things too, in terms of, okay, giving up control. We've done well by being in control. We've done things our way. We don't really want someone who doesn't understand what's going on in this industry to, or in this business, to be all of a sudden making all the decisions because of what they see on a piece of paper or a spreadsheet. But mostly we looked at it and said, when these companies, and I misappropriated this, initially it's a private equity. But I would say, when private equity comes in and says, all right, let's buy two companies and smash them together, and 2 + 2 = 5.
Mm-hmm.
Every piece of evidence that I saw was that 2 + 2 = 3. Mm-hmm. That you actually don't even get the return on what you bought when you bring them together. But because it's integrated, and you say it's one company, that someone's willing to pay more for 1 3 than they are for 2 2s. Mm-hmm. And so the wealth creation investment thesis, holds some water, as long as that arbitrage continues, but the value to what you're doing in the business does not. Mm-hmm. And that's a really different, that was the challenge we saw with, the employees are the first people to go after an acquisition because they don't know who they work for anymore, and they don't see that vision. And the employee and the clients go because they're not connected to the company; they're connected to the employees. Mm-hmm. The experience that those employees provide. So when we started looking at what was available in the market, we said it's not there. I mean, and even the idea, we were big enough that people said, "Well, yeah, you just get an investment and you can be the platform and other people come into you," but it creates actually the same level of distraction, the same level of challenge. If you're the platform, not just the platformee or the, one being integrated. And so Mitch Morgan, who is the founder of New Charter, and I had known each other for a long time. We had a lot of these conversations about what we felt like needed to happen and what was missing. And he had spent time in technology companies and running organizations and then also consulting with MSPs and talking, doing a lot of both operational and M&A consulting. And so what if there's a different way to do this? Mm-hmm. And he took all of his background and said, I think there is a different way to do this. We can create a platform that doesn't need to, centralize everything. It doesn't need to, can have a very different thesis, and we can still get investment back. And we just have to have the right investor, in that, who believes, in that idea. And I tell a story. He came to Denver. He flew in. We met at the train station in downtown Denver. He took the train from the airport. Jesse and I met him. Went through what he was looking to do, with this company, New Charter Technologies, and got excited. And thought it was a really cool concept. And an hour later, he went back, got on the train, went back to the airport. And Jesse and I turned to each other and said, "That's a great. It sounds really cool, but there's no way it's going to work." And it didn't. We did, connect into, that original group. We talked through the thesis and all that, but we just couldn't find the right investor at that point in time, mm-hmm. For what we really needed to do, to get it off the ground.
Unpack that a little bit, because I think that's easy to miss. You couldn't find the right investor, because I think it's easy. I've been in this trap of saying, well, an investor is just somebody that writes a check, or it's just capital. But there's some nuance there.
There's definitely nuance. And the nuance for me in that is that, and I've learned a lot in the last 5 years, but one of the things is some people there are two types of investors in the MSP space. There are people that don't know how to run MSPs. Mm-hmm. And there are people that know that they don't know how to run MSPs. And, what we found was people who looked at this and said, well, every investor has some thesis for what they think and how they think they're going to create, wealth and value, and a lot of them have playbooks that, hey, you take this company that maybe doesn't have all the maturity, they've got a lot of potential, and you run a playbook, or you run an integration playbook, and a lot of that has to do with you spend a bunch on salespeople, you really ramp up a sales engine, things like that. If you look at our industry, and it's a little bit of what I talked about in that segment that I did recently with Bob Berg, mm-hmm. is the fact that sales is not persuasion in the MSP space. Sales is influencing people to do what they need to do mm-hmm. in their business. It's not convincing to do something that they shouldn't normally do, in their, that's not the best option for them.
I can't imagine you could say, if I, 50% off this firewall, if I find a way, can you buy today? Exactly.
It's just so
used car sales tactic to try to move a service or manage services.
We say all the time in this space, it's much more a job interview than it is a sales process. Mm-hmm. We have to be methodical about it. We have to be good at it. We have to be consistent. We got to, involve the right people. We need to be able to scale that process, but we can't pretend that it's different than it is. Mm-hmm. And so you look at some of these private equity playbooks when it comes to other industries, and they just don't apply very well to our market for the same reason that our market doesn't scale very easily. And companies, stay small and things stay fragmented. There's a reason. You got to understand that reason. And, so I always say, when you look for investors, alignment, what I learned was that control was overrated. We all worry about control of our entity. Control is overrated. Alignment is not. Mm. Alignment is underrated. And when we're looking for an investor to say, okay, well, what is your outcome? What is your process? Why do you think this is valuable? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are just trying to convince the investor to maximize the value of what they're doing, but that doesn't maximize the future. And if you want to sell your business for a point in time and never think about it again, great. You've got different options out there. You got more options. I don't know anybody like that. Right. I said that I felt like my goal, or I was saying, someone probably could have offered us enough money that it would have been worth it for me to watch them destroy what we built. But I never found that offer, and I don't know what it would have been. It would have had to, incentivize a lot of different people, not just me, in that, to give up on the thing that we care so much about. So what we found in that process is that if you think you have the playbook, but it doesn't apply to the industry, if you think you have the experience, but it's not relevant, or you think you have the financial structure, but you look at it and say, I'm not going to be able to build the future that I need to with this organization out of this, then it's not the right investor. And the other important thing is to realize if it's not the right investor, it's going to suck for them too. Because they're coming in with the understanding that that their view is going to work. And if we know it's not going to work, or we don't feel it's going to work, it's irresponsible, even if it's the highest dollar amount. You're not going to get the best return. Yeah. So we didn't find the investor. We went on our separate ways. We had a few companies, together at that time that were focused on doing this together, and that was 2018. Kept in touch with Mitch, and in 2020 came back and said, "Hey, we found an investor." We started in a little slower process, just investing in one company at a time, and we were to the point where it's really working. And so I think it's time. It's time for you guys to consider that again. And that was a month into COVID, where we're all like, "Well, this is the craziest time to think about selling a business. It's the craziest time to think about doing something different. We're all just kind of trying to survive." Yeah. But we looked at it and we went through the process, and without meeting anybody in person, we joined New Charter, that August, and that's the time when New Charter we had the critical mass to build out some corporate structure. We hired a CFO, we moved some people around, and really started focusing on what the culture of this organization was going to be moving forward. And the thing, to go back to the investment piece, that really connected with us is that it was a common investment structure, but it had unique nuances to it. So Oval Partners is our investment sponsor. It's a small spinoff from Golden Gate Capital. A couple of Golden Gate Capital partners who are really deploying multifamily office money. So it's money that is theirs, and close to them, rather than going out and raising really large funds with specific fund timelines and things like that. So we call it multifamily office money, also patient capital, in the sense that it doesn't have to exist on a really specific timeline for return. But what they did, so instead of having a bunch of LPs, limited partners in the fund that are the beneficiary, the investors, and then the beneficiaries, they invite the founding sellers, to participate in that at the same level as them. So whereas most times you sell to private equity, they're going to maximize their ownership stake. And, maybe you can negotiate a 5-10% reinvestment to, be able to share in some future upside. New Charter allows and encourages 30%, and so you're cashing out a significant portion of the value, but there's still a significant portion that's driving things moving forward. That vehicle, especially with it all being Class A shares, single class of stock, we have alignment. We have alignment on the outcomes, and so while we have some patience and some discretion around timing and what that looks like, there's no wondering, are they going to make out well and we're not, or things like that. And that just gives a tremendous amount of security across the organization. What it also means is that we don't buy companies where the CEO, president, are interested in just going away. Mm-hmm. We want organizations where they come in and they build with us, and they are a key part of what we're doing, at least for a season while we shepherd things into the future, and so obviously everybody's on their own timeline as far as retirement and things like that, but if it's not a rip the name off the door, change leadership, all that on day one, we don't have that shock to the business that is created, in a lot of the other investment structures and a lot of the other platforms that we've seen over the years. And the real fun part is that in having, people with so much skin in the game, lifelong entrepreneurs in the MSP space coming together in this platform, that we've got a room of experience that nobody else has in this industry. So now we've got the autonomy in the market spaces. We integrate, back office, we integrate key systems, but and we've increased that over time as we've seen value. Our mantra is we consolidate and integrate for value, not vanity. So the value has to follow the value chain of customers, employees, and then the leadership, platform partners, that we can't lose sight of why we didn't join one of the traditional methods, to begin with. We never want to be that because we need to deliver more value to our customers and our employees. So in doing that, it doesn't mean that we can't consolidate things. We absolutely can. We just do it with a different lens. And that's what's fun for us, is that no one's doing it that way. And some people have started doing it, a little bit more that way because some of the traditional ways haven't worked as well. But, we're not afraid of them, looking at what we're doing and joining along, with that idea. We have this incredible room of partners. We have this incredible critical mass, of business. And now we have the ability, our focus now is how do we take this and become the organization that changes the industry? Mm-hmm. We have to look very different in the age of, in 12, 18 months in terms of what our services look like, deep engagements with customers, going back to solving business problems with technology, employing AI and all of that. So we have this ability now to take this platform, and we've got all the pieces. The only thing that can get it in our way is us. In that.
So in your view, why is New Charter Technologies a platform? I think there's some people that say you got to roll them all together, you got to integrate everything. Yep. Some people that say maybe don't touch anything, don't integrate anything, just buy them and hold them.
Yep.
What's your view?
It's one of my favorite questions. Both sides of that are much simpler. Consolidate everything. You've got one thesis, you've got one purpose, you've got very little complexity. You just have to wrench and contort businesses to get them into that mindset, and that's painful, and it typically costs a lot. Mm-hmm. And you're starting over in a lot of spaces. The number one, impact to that is organic growth. Those organizations typically are so caught up in the integration mindset that, the work, that they have to pause, focus on what really makes them relevant in the market and what makes them great at bringing on new customers. On the other side, you've got your portfolio companies, or your holding companies that, buy them and hold them. Really bred from the same thesis, but with none of the upside, none of the ability to build something together for the future. And I think that mindset has come from watching or experiencing the failure of integration, in organizations. So the reason why we're a platform, the short answer is because we do far more together than separate. People don't realize that in New Charter. And we build value together, and we have more opportunity and we have more value in what we do because of New Charter than we would ever have independently. The longer answer, is think about this. if you take two static companies, and where they're at, and say, all right, you guys need to merge, and you focus on taking some of the best parts of each of them, or maybe one of them is better, so you fold one into the other one. But they're static organizations. Our view of that is that you end up with, you're just putting concrete shoes on those organizations. They're going nowhere until they can rationalize the business together, figure things out, get used to it, replace all the people you lost, all of those pieces. And you might end up with something very, very compelling, but what's the cost of it? How far back did you go? That integrating two static businesses is more costly than it's worth, in my mind. Integrating and consolidating on a journey forward is a lot different than that. You get two companies that sit side by side, they're different. And we're not paying attention to, okay, you do this now and I do this now. We're paying attention to, in the next 18 months, we have to both be able to do this, and it's got to look like this. So what's our path to get there? And then you have two companies that both have forward paths. They have a point that they're meeting, at. But the friction isn't there. The noise isn't there. You're not, the disruption and shock, it's not easy. You have to, it's not as simple as just drawing a couple lines on paper. But the thesis is so much different, in that. So we're willing, and as part of our strategy, to be patient in how we do those things. Again, focusing on where the value is and where we're creating value. So from a platform, the holding company would not look at this and say, well, let's invest in our future service strategy, our AI-enabled services strategy, our the depth of services that no individual company can offer, the specialized services that come around that, that only a large platform could offer. But let's plan for that, and let's put everybody on their own individual path towards the same point. So the milestones along that are, we bring together finance here. We bring together, and ultimately service will look very, very similar without us mandating that service becomes uniform, because we've already, worked to elevate systems. We've already worked to elevate, some of these things into the future and say, let's change it together. Let's change toward that point and use our momentum, not just stop our momentum so we can turn, and make sure that we, just rationalize all of this in a horizontal frame. So does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I like we're all going in the same direction. We're aligned. We all have our own path. So is it fair to characterize this as, we're all in the U.S. and we're all in major cities, and we all happen to be fortunate enough to have a direct flight to Hawaii. One path is we're all going to fly into Atlanta, whether you're on the East Coast or West, and then take the flight to Hawaii. Or I could board directly from San Francisco or New York or Miami and get to the same place.
Yeah, that's conceptual. I'll say the one difference in that, I like the analogy, but there's benefits in being close, and so it's not just about the destination. We can create value along the way. I don't need everybody to operate, the exact same way, in terms of how they triage a ticket, and go through and interact with the customer. I need them to know their customer, and I need to make sure that I understand how the customer feels about the relationship and how they're engaging with that in a consistent way. So, our view of client satisfaction, our view of employee satisfaction, our view, of so many of those things is absolutely important. To have consistent measurements or a consistent view, on that. Do I need to be the one to say, well, you skipped the step in how you went through that ticket? Not at this point. That doesn't create value for us, in that. Now, if we reach, a perfectly final destination on that, to say, all right, we've arrived. I don't think you ever really arrive in business. But, we get to a place where, we might care about some of those nuances. But if I start caring about those nuances now, I'm going to have a problem, because I have to care about things that really matter, bringing those things together. So
it's interesting, and to make another analogy, you've got investors that if you don't understand the nuance, a family office does have more patient capital than a fund with an exit. They have a timeline, and they have to return the capital by a specific time frame, and they're judged on that. And then it sounds like because you're retaining the talent, you've got these folks that nobody else has. These guys that have run these businesses forever, and then you kind of have for lack of a better way of saying the analogy, patient operators.
Yeah. And I'll say part of the challenge in it is the fact that people want to know timing. I mean, there's a reason why it's great when you do understand that. But so if we had the capital without the transparency with our partners, around kind of what's happening and working with them, consistently updating and engaging them, then that would be a bit more of a challenge. But our job in this, is to maximize the market, and maximize at any point in time. We're building for something, with permanence, and we're also building so that our strategy is the one that the investor, that the investors that are climbing over themselves, to invest in down the line, so that we have to pay attention to what, the future investments are, but our strategy being, and why it's so important that we build effectively for the future and maintain organic growth is that's what an investor wants. And if they can have both of those things, they're not going to disrupt a strategy. Mm-hmm. So I don't need them to perfectly buy into and understand every piece of what we're doing. I need them to understand that our pursuit of, this deep, service model with our customers through, the value chain of customers, employees, all of that it works, that it continues to be the right thing for the future, and that it's the right thing to invest in and to put more investment into and to continue that, to do more of that faster, and so that's where, as a CEO, that's really what my job, is to make sure that not just the vision, but the execution of the vision is something that's leading the industry. That no one can look at it and say, well, that company would be great if only they would, turn that direction, or things like that. So we're far more intentional, I think, than what the general market sometimes sees because of some brand fragmentation, and things like that. But inside the walls, if you see kind of the specific steps, that we have, and the specific ways that we measure and look at success, it's a much different view.
Mm. So earlier you talked about the MSP is hard to scale. I know. I had a much smaller MSP and it didn't feel easy to scale as I added. And so I think that's the easy argument to make. But I have a question, a counter one, which is if it's a people business, if the core of it is people businesses are hard to scale, which I buy that, why do we have gigantic law firms? Why do we have the big three if those are people businesses?
Yep. They are people businesses. And we've asked ourselves the same questions. You have those partnerships. The difference is, I think that we're a people business. And I think that we are far more like a law firm and an accounting firm than we are like cool tech companies. We provide services. Mm-hmm. But so many services in a law firm and an accounting firm are provided by individuals. Mm-hmm. So you don't have to scale an experience. You only have to scale the ability to support those individuals and their relationships. So it's their book of business, and all that. Think about technology now and all that, bringing together multiple skill sets and also changing rapidly, in that. The framework's more complex. It's still services. It's still, outsourcing what might be, positions that they would hire for, but the layers of it are significantly different. And so when you work with your attorney who works at a massive law firm that has 450 attorneys, we can't just say, we have 450 IT people, here's yours. Or this person has this specialty because of this one thing that you're going through. Yeah. So we have to build a programmatic, experience that is far more complex. It also, I think, is where the industry has opportunity, is because people need 6, 7, 8 skill sets, even before they can hire 6, 7, 8 people to do those things. And so continually the opportunities, open up, in the larger small businesses, and lower middle market to say, outsourcing maybe does make more sense because it's getting more complicated in terms of the landscape. The technology is getting easier, but the landscape is getting more complicated. So that's why I think that it's also why I think that those organizations are going to be some of the first that are ripe for disruption with AI and some of those things. I mean, I'm already looking at, just from as we look at normalizing, service agreements, using AI to compare service terms, into contracts to know where the dissimilarities are, rather than trying to go through and read all of that information. Yeah. And obviously we have to be very focused on, security and all of those things, but there's ways to do things now without picking up the phone and calling an attorney or calling an accountant, and you still need them. But those industries, where it's much more the one-to-one relationship, I think are going to be the ones that struggle, and we're going to be the ones that grow through this because we're bringing simplicity to something that's massively complex.
You've got a unique view of the market. What's your view of M&A, and what inning are we in? I think we're reaching a point where the things are going to net out that are positive, and things are going to net out that are negative. We're going to see a shift in. I think we're going to continue to see M&A be, where it's at, if not more so, but it's going to be different. I think that buy everything you can and just, will trail off, Is that because they're learning, or is that due to cost of capital or some other?
I think it's honestly going to be the cost of available quality, in that is that, inventory is it's already not that great, compared to what it was, in terms of looking at businesses saying, well, that's going to be value add to us, and I can add value to that. We say no to far more businesses than we say yes to right now. And so there will be some players on the lower end that will look at that as an opportunity to consolidate smaller or less mature organizations. But if you think about that they have to bring the maturity to all of those, in the process of consolidating them to be able to play in a bigger space. That's challenging. But I think that you will see more consolidation, of organizations in the larger scale, and so you'll see platforms consolidate. You'll see big companies that have grown in the past have said, well, I'm staying independent until I get to a certain size, coming together. And I think that we're going to see a new round of valuations around those businesses. We're going to see a new round of learning about what it takes to bring platforms together, not just, individually bootstrapped MSPs. And I think that you're going to see it's going to require different skill sets. To go back to the question that you started with at the very beginning, like having to be different people, along this journey, and it's going to require something significantly different, in order to take scale to that very next level.
Well, on that note, how have you become that different person? And I don't know how many times, but you had to be a different person, and you had to be it more rapidly than most. Yeah, we didn't talk much about the transition, to, being the CEO of New Charter, which was methodical and not fast. It's been recent, but if you look at that transformation over time, I can trace it back far better than I can, map it forward. Yeah. Or map it forward from back then. But if I look back then, the most important part of it is that it never feels like becoming a different person if your passion is to figure out how to constantly be a different person. And so when I talked about my passion being doing something that the other people haven't done, the natural, partner to that is a curiosity about what it takes to do it, and a lack of, and candidly,
because I'm looking at, and I've always looked at doing something that isn't a known path, I don't have to care too much about proving that I know what I've done in the past, that I know what I'm doing, or that I know everything already and I'm perfectly ready for all of these things.
Right.
And so by letting go of that idea that I've got to posture, I've got to show that I know all of it, it opens up the doors for just massive curiosity. Like I don't love being wrong, but I love figuring out better ways to do things. And so in that, you love you end up loving the process of figuring out that there's something you didn't know. And so from a mindset, perspective, I would not have been able to, and I won't be able to into the future, change quickly, in these things if it wasn't just built into how I want to operate and what's most exciting to me, in that space. Now it can't be manic. I can't be the kind of leader that wakes up. I have to be a consistent leader, but learning to listen to what's around me and watch what's around me for curiosity, not just to be able to prove my points, or justify things, is something that I just constantly have to be on alert, about. I have to be listening, to those things. And so as I look at, within Greystone, it was, the individual, person, doing IT to the team lead, as people came on, to, running the sales operation, hiring, a sales leader, to being a partner in a larger organization as we were focused on, to, all of those different things were micro reinventions. Some were more painful than others. Some are less natural than others. So when Mitch, started New Charter, and he always told me, he said that his biggest regret was just not doing it sooner. And he knew that would be the last stage, in his career. He was very family focused and very, very, it was just. And so we talked about it for even prior to Greystone coming into New Charter, and he always felt like I had the potential in that. And so a few years ago, he and the board hired an executive coach, that had done a lot of CEO transitions to both, coach and also assess. It's a little bit like having a business counselor where there's no confidentiality, but throughout the process, obviously they gained comfort not with who I was then, but how I evolved over those years, and recognizing the trajectory. Because you said something, in one of our conversations about, it's surprising that they would elevate, an MSP founder, a bootstrap company. A lot of investors love to put their people, in. But really what investors want is to maximize upside and minimize risk.
Yep.
That's it. And so my focus was on becoming the highest upside, lowest downside option for them, as they looked at this, which is everything from knowledge of the industry to, be the ability to influence people, and all of those things that I learned a lot of through the years, of building Greystone. But the new skills were doing that at scale, doing that, realizing that I have to cascade that down through so much more. I have to simplify a vision, and then I have to lead the execution of that vision, with very little regard, for, tolerating waste, for tolerating, things. So it's this science and art, of realizing that at the end of the day, the results have to speak for themselves, and we have to, make short-term, medium-term, and long-term decisions for the business. And we have to articulate that effectively, and we have to make sure that people are aligned. And it started with coming in and saying, we've got this room of people that love each other. It's great. But do we all know why we're here? Are we all here together? And can we connect on the commonality for why we're here? And things like that. So it was through that process of articulating what I felt like the future needed to look like that demonstrated to the board, as they looked at their options, that I was the highest upside, lowest downside, option. And it does come from the fact that it helps that I have the experience in knowing this industry inside and out, but it helps that I use an entirely different skill set now to do my current job.
Yeah. The second part is probably the unusual part, though.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I go back to that curiosity, if I go back to, and the coaching and the understanding, of all of these different pieces, I can't do things the same way, but honestly, it's way more fun realizing that it doesn't all come down to me. I have to be accountable for all of it. I have to be accountable for the results. I have to be accountable for the outcomes. And I'm fully comfortable with being accountable. I mean, I've learned over time that I have to be accountable for things that I can't directly control. But at the end of the day, it's not all about me. It's about, especially as we scale, the right people in the right places with the right understanding of where to go, being able to, drive those things free of, restriction, and the chains that hold people back. We can't afford for me to make all the decisions in this business. The way that I did the early years of Greystone, and I can't afford. I would be miserable. And someone told me one time, said, "You won't enjoy every day of this, but you can assess some of your abilities in the job and how it's going based on how much you enjoy when you wake up. Because if the burden of everything is on you, then you haven't appropriately enrolled people and empowered people, to share that. And if it's so stressful because you don't know what's happening in the organization, then you've pushed people too far away from you. But in that sweet spot, and there are definitely stressful days and stressful times and frustrations and all of that, but in that sweet spot, I would wake up every day and say, I thought I had my dream job 10 years ago, and I have a new one, and this one's better.
I love that so much. What's the biggest lesson you've learned through all these years?
I don't know if it's the biggest, but it's one that it's the first one that comes to mind that I talk about a lot, and that is the idea of empathy at scale. Compassionate people and people who enjoy, interaction with people, their emotional intelligence, empathy is something that comes up over and over, and we should be leading our company, especially people-oriented companies, with empathy. There's a difference between empathy for a person and empathy for the masses or the majority. And oftentimes you have that one person who's struggling or not cutting it, and you're really just trying to get them up to the, or, hey, they're really good over here, but they're struggling with their team members over here. And you're focused on, how do I make this work for one person? How do I make sure that I don't have to let this person go because that doesn't feel empathetic? And you lose 10 other people who quit because they can't tolerate the fact that you're tolerating this or, not addressing this. And what I learned over time is that every decision that I made, where I looked at it through the lens of how can I be empathetic to the entire landscape? It doesn't mean that I'm not empathetic to the individual. We all absolutely work to handle every situation with empathy, for individuals. But my decisions can't promote the idea that this one person is more important than the organization. You end up losing the people that are most valuable and preserving the people who are struggling. And the other thing that was a surprise to me over the years is that every time I made a hard call, I can look back, and those people, by and large, are significantly better off somewhere else. That I would put so much pressure on myself to not just be empathetic, but to be the answer. For all of the things that, and to be everything to everybody. And it just doesn't work that way. So empathy at scale, is really the only way that it works to scale an organization effectively.
That's beautiful. I think it's too easy to hold on to they won't have a job. They're going to have a job. They're going to go be successful somewhere else. What's one thing you would do over if you could? I would listen.
I would create structures to listen to different people more effectively that weren't as vocal. They didn't feel like they were speaking up at various inflection points in our organization. We learned things later that people thought and felt because they didn't feel comfortable. They just weren't as vocal about things. And so the vocal majority, ran too many things for a while. And there were times that if I would have really understood what was happening in all the mindsets, it would have changed that pretty significantly.
Wow, that's really powerful. What's one thing you're looking forward to?
Every quarter I look forward to getting together with our partners. Every quarter. I mean, it's my favorite thing when we get together as a group. We talk about strategy. We have hard conversations. We have fun conversations. We have late night conversations, and we have, big boardroom conversations. Those relationships and understanding the power of what can be harnessed for what we do is something that I look forward to constantly. The thing that one thing that more in the future that I'm looking forward to is rolling out the benefits of an automation and AI, platform strategy that the industry needs and people don't, people aren't expecting.
Interesting. Very interesting. For the folks that are listening, if they'd like to learn more about the charter or find you, connect with you, how would you recommend they do that?
So find me on LinkedIn, Peter Melby. It's a relatively unique name. I think the only other Peter Melby I know is my uncle, and he's a doctor. I'm a college dropout, so that's not me. Hit me up there. newchartertech.com is the website. I definitely love staying connected with people in this industry.
This was so amazing. I love your curiosity. I love your heart and empathy. This was just a gift. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on MSP Mindset.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it a lot.